The morning sun bathed the Tampa courthouse in a golden hue, the air thick with the usual hum of legal proceedings. Lawyers shuffled through the hallways, murmuring in hushed tones as they prepared for their cases. It was supposed to be another ordinary day of hearings and legal battles, a routine part of the judicial machine. But today, something different was brewing, something that no one in the courtroom was prepared for. Pam Bondi stepped through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She carried herself with an air of quiet confidence, her black leather bag slung over one shoulder, the crisp lines of her navy blue blazer highlighting her composed demeanor. Her opponents often underestimated her, mistaking her poise for passivity, but they always learned, sometimes too late, that beneath her calm exterior lay the heart of a warrior. As she walked to her designated seat, she felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension lingering beneath the surface. The presiding judge, Judge Prescott, was already seated behind the raised mahogany bench, his sharp eyes scanning the room with an expression of rigid control. Prescott was known for his no-nonsense approach, his courtroom a place of strict order. But as his gaze landed on Pam, something changed. His focus was not on her legal briefs or her stance. His eyes locked onto the delicate golden cross resting against her collarbone. A beat of silence stretched through the room before Prescott leaned forward, his voice a firm and commanding presence. "Ms. Bondi, religious symbols have no place in my courtroom. You will remove that cross, or you will face sanctions." The murmurs in the courtroom quieted instantly. The stenographer hesitated, her fingers hovering above the keys. A bailiff shifted uncomfortably. No one had expected this. A dispute over evidence, procedure, or decorum was commonplace. But a demand to remove a religious symbol, that was something new. Pam met Prescott's gaze without hesitation. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this cross is no different from a wedding ring or a locket containing a family photo. It is a personal belonging, not a statement of defiance." Prescott's expression remained impassive. "Regardless of what it means to you, it presents an issue of neutrality in this court. Remove it, or I will impose a fine." Pam felt the weight of the moment settle over her. This was no longer a simple courtroom demand. It was a matter of constitutional rights. The law was clear, and she knew it well. She had spent years defending the very principles that Prescott was attempting to suppress. She folded her hands over her legal briefs, her voice unwavering. "Your Honor, before this proceeding moves forward, I would like this issue entered into the official record." Prescott arched an eyebrow, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "Ms. Bondi, we are here to litigate a commercial dispute, not to engage in personal grievances." Pam leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "And I am here to remind the court that constitutional rights do not cease to exist at the doors of this building." A thick silence settled over the room. The court reporter adjusted her posture, preparing to transcribe. The spectators barely dared to breathe. Pam reached into her bag, retrieving a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the desk before her with deliberate care. "You are penalizing me for wearing a symbol of faith. If this is to be enforced, it must be justified on legal grounds." Prescott's jaw tensed, his fingers tapping against the bench. "This is my courtroom, Ms. Bondi." Pam gave a small nod. "Yes, Your Honor, but your authority does not override the Constitution." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Pam saw it in the way the clerks avoided making eye contact, in the way the bailiff's hand hovered near his radio. They all knew something unprecedented was unfolding before them. Prescott inhaled deeply, as if weighing his options. "If you continue to refuse my order, I will be forced to issue a contempt ruling." Pam barely suppressed a smirk. "And if you do, I will immediately file an appeal. This case will make national headlines." The judge's eyes darkened. He drummed his fingers once more, then exhaled sharply. The sanction is withdrawn. Proceed with your case." A quiet murmur rippled through the room, a sign that everyone knew something significant had just occurred. But as far as Pam was concerned, this was only the beginning. Because some battles don't end in the courtroom. Some begin there. And Prescott wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat lightly. Pam Bondi knew that battles like these never ended within the four walls of a courtroom. The moment she had challenged Judge Prescott's authority, she had drawn a line in the sand. She had embarrassed him, on the record no less. And men like Prescott never forgot humiliation. That night, as Pam sat in her Tampa office, reviewing case notes under the dim glow of her desk lamp, she felt the weight of the day pressing against her. She had faced hostile judges before, but something about Prescott's reaction unsettled her. He hadn't just been annoyed, he had been enraged. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. She glanced at the clock, 9:42 p.m. Too late for a client, too late for a friendly visit. She hesitated, then stood, crossing the room with measured steps. As she reached for the doorknob, her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. Opening the door just enough to see who was on the other side, she found a man standing in the dimly lit hallway. He was dressed in a dark gray suit, his features sharp, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Bondi," he said smoothly, his voice carrying a practiced calmness. "I apologize for the late hour. My name is Richard Dane. I work with Judge Prescott." Pam didn't move. "I'm not sure what business you'd have with me outside of court." Mr. Dane gave a small, polite smile. "Judge Prescott wanted me to deliver a message. Off the record." Pam's grip on the door tightened slightly. "Is that so?" Dane reached into his suit pocket and produced a crisp white envelope, holding it out to her. "A simple request. Consider it." Pam took the envelope, but didn't open it. "If Judge Prescott has something to say, he can say it in court." Dane's smile never wavered. "We both know this isn't about court, Ms. Bondi. Some fights aren't worth having." She stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about power, control. A message was being sent. Pam exhaled slowly, then gave a curt nod. "I'll consider it." Dane dipped his head slightly. "That's all we ask." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Pam shut the door and locked it, then immediately tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed. "Drop the appeal, or the next time we won't be so polite." Pam's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. She clenched the note in her fist. Prescott thought he could intimidate her into silence. He was wrong. Because now it was personal. Pam Bondi wasn't the type to be easily intimidated. She had spent years in courtrooms dismantling weak arguments and exposing corruption. If Judge Prescott thought a veiled threat would scare her into silence, he had severely miscalculated. By the next morning, Pam was already taking her next step. She sat at her desk, phone in hand, scrolling through her contacts. She wasn't just going to fight this in a courtroom, she was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what Prescott was trying to do. She found the name she was looking for and hit dial. After 2 rings, Lisa Reynolds picked up. "Pam, I was just about to call you." Lisa was one of the top investigative journalists in the country, known for exposing judicial corruption and abuse of power. If there was anyone who could put a spotlight on Prescott's actions, it was her. "Lisa, I need you to listen carefully." Pam's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "A judge just tried to fine me for wearing a cross in court. When I challenged him, he backed down. But now he's coming after me outside the courtroom." Lisa was silent for a second before she let out a sharp breath. "You're telling me a sitting judge is using his influence to punish you for calling out his abuse of power?" Pam smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Lisa didn't hesitate. "I'm running this." Pam leaned forward. I need it out before they try to spin it. Once it's public, Prescott won't be able to twist this into a quiet disciplinary issue. Lisa was already on it. I'll have a segment up by tonight. I'll make sure legal analysts weigh in, especially ones who won't be afraid to call this out for what it is. Pam hung up, feeling the first stirrings of momentum shifting in her favor. But she wasn't done yet. She turned to Lauren, her assistant, who was already waiting at the door. Draft a public statement. I want my position clear before Prescott and his allies try to muddy the waters. Lauren nodded. How do you want to frame it? Pam's expression was unwavering. As exactly what it is, an attack on personal rights and an abuse of judicial power. If Prescott thinks he can punish me for standing up for myself, imagine what he's done to people who don't have a platform. Lauren's jaw tightened. I'll get it done. Pam exhaled, gathering her thoughts. Prescott had been counting on silence. He was about to be very disappointed. By the time Pam sat down with her coffee the next morning, her phone was already buzzing non-stop. The story had exploded. Lisa Reynolds had run the segment overnight, and the headline was everywhere. Florida judge attempts to punish attorney for wearing a cross, but it doesn't go as planned. News outlets across the board had picked it up. Legal analysts from every political background were weighing in. A constitutional lawyer from Georgetown went on live television, tearing Prescott's logic apart. This is a blatant overreach that has no legal standing. Another high-profile attorney posted a detailed breakdown of the case, exposing how Prescott's actions could set a dangerous precedent. Pam scrolled through her notifications, seeing the impact in real time. Then came the statement she had been waiting for. The Florida Judicial Review Board announced that, due to the media attention, they would be reviewing Judge Prescott's conduct to determine whether his ruling had violated judicial ethics. Pam sat back in her chair, exhaling. This was no longer just about her. This was about every attorney, every defendant, every person who had ever stepped into a courtroom and wondered whether their rights could be stripped away by the whim of a judge. Lauren walked in, holding up her phone. You're going to want to see this. Pam took it and pressed play. It was Prescott. He was standing outside the courthouse, cameras flashing around him. His expression was stiff, his posture tense. The statement was short, too short for someone who was trying to defend himself. I have always upheld the integrity of this courtroom. The actions taken were in the interest of maintaining neutrality. However, I respect the judicial review process and will cooperate fully. Pam almost laughed. Neutrality? He was still trying to play that card? Lauren crossed her arms. He's trying to save face. Pam nodded. And failing. Because this wasn't going away. If the Judicial Review Board ruled against Prescott, it wouldn't just be a professional embarrassment, it would set a precedent. One that protected people like Pam from ever facing this kind of retaliation again. But even if they didn't formally reprimand him, he had already lost where it mattered most: his reputation, his credibility, his authority. Because after this, every attorney who walked into his courtroom would know exactly who he was. The judge who tried to silence someone and lost. Pam took a slow sip of her coffee and looked at Lauren. We won. Lauren smirked. Oh, I know. Pam set her cup down. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had sent a message. Never let someone in power strip away your rights without a fight. Because sometimes all it took was one person standing their ground to change everything. The Florida Judicial Review Board convened faster than anyone expected. The media storm had made it impossible for them to ignore the situation. What started as a case of judicial overreach had transformed into a nationwide debate about personal rights, religious freedom, and the abuse of power. Pam Bondi knew that whatever happened next wouldn't just affect her. It would set a precedent for future cases. If Prescott got away with this, other judges might feel emboldened to abuse their authority in similar ways. She sat in the back of the hearing room, her expression unreadable. Across from her, Judge Prescott sat stiffly, his hands clasped together, his expression betraying nothing. But Pam knew better. He was feeling the pressure. The chairman of the board, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Evelyn Carter, looked over the assembled panel of judges and lawyers before speaking. "Judge Prescott, the allegations against you are serious. You are accused of attempting to penalize an attorney for wearing a religious symbol in court, then retaliating against her when she challenged your ruling. Do you have a statement before we proceed?" Prescott cleared his throat. "I acted within my authority to maintain neutrality in my courtroom. Ms. Bondi's decision to wear religious imagery could be seen as influencing the jury." Pam had to bite back a sharp laugh. That was his defense. Evelyn Carter raised an eyebrow. "Judge Prescott, there is no law or legal precedent supporting your claim. Attorneys across the country wear crosses, Star of David necklaces, and other personal symbols. You singled out Ms. Bondi without legal justification." Prescott opened his mouth but hesitated. He knew he was losing. The board called in legal experts to testify. One by one, they dismantled Prescott's argument. "Judges cannot make arbitrary rulings based on personal bias. The law does not support punishing attorneys for personal religious expressions that do not interfere with proceedings. This is judicial overreach, plain and simple." Pam watched as Prescott's face grew paler with each passing statement. He had ruled from the bench for years, making decisions without being questioned. But today, he wasn't the one in control. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Evelyn Carter looked around the room before delivering the board's decision. "Judge Prescott, after reviewing the evidence, this panel finds that your actions were an abuse of judicial discretion. Effective immediately, you are suspended from the bench pending further disciplinary action." A stunned silence filled the room. Then, a murmur of voices rippled through the crowd. Prescott's career was effectively over. Even if he wasn't permanently removed, his reputation was destroyed. Pam let out a slow breath. It was over. Prescott stood, his jaw tight, and stormed out of the room without another word. Cameras flashed as reporters chased after him, but he didn't stop. Lauren leaned over to Pam and whispered, "He never thought he'd lose." Pam smiled. "That's the problem with people like him. They always think they're untouchable, until they're not." As she walked out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed around her, microphones shoved in her direction. "Ms. Bondi, do you have any comments on today's ruling?" She stopped, turned to face the cameras, and spoke clearly. "This case was never just about me. It was about ensuring that no judge can use their power to punish someone for exercising their rights. Today's decision sends a clear message. Abuse of authority will not be tolerated." The questions kept coming, but Pam had said everything she needed to say. She stepped past the reporters, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Lauren fell into step beside her. "So what now?" Pam thought for a moment, then smiled. "Now? We keep fighting. Because this wasn't just about one case. It was about making sure no one, no matter how powerful, ever got away with stripping away someone's rights again."